He's the founder and CEO of Maricris Therapeutics, based right here at the Frontier. Please welcome Chris Broderick.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So today I'd like to talk to you guys about advancing wound care for the future and the approach that we're taking at Maricris Therapeutics as a regenerative medicine, but not just a medicine, but a precision-based treatment regime that we think is an innovation in wound care. So there's a large problem within wound care for wounds that don't heal, which will be approaching a $16 billion market with primarily 3 different categories of wounds, from acute surgical wounds, diabetic wounds, and venous wounds. While there may be different underlying pathologies that contribute to diabetic ulcers as compared to venous ulcers and surgical or trauma wounds, the common denominator is that the cells are not properly functioning, therefore these wounds are not healing. And when wounds don't heal, patients face serious risks such as infection and ultimately amputation, whether that be their toes, a portion of their lower extremity, or a full lower extremity loss. So wound care has evolved over the last 100 years from dry dressings to wet dressings, innovations in devices that have treated wounds such as vacuum-based systems to pull blood into the wound bed and pull the wound together. And most commonly today in advanced wound care, there are a variety of products commercially marketed that are biological skin substitutes. Some of these come from animal origin, some from human origin, some from birth tissue origin, but what they do all have in common is they're all topical biological bandages. Some have living cells on them, some have different protein factors, some are native proteins that are found in human tissues, and that's where we stand today. And our thought at Maricris Therapeutics is, what if we could treat the phase of the wound? Wounds have 3 different phases of wound healing, and what these wounds need to go through in a succession of stage 1, stage 2, and stage 3 is the epithelial cells, which are skin and barrier cells, need to convert into a mesenchymal type of a cell, or a medicinal signaling cell that really is the powerhouse of healing the wound bed and filling in that wound bed and depositing collagen and secreting all types of proteins that contribute to the tissue regeneration in a wound that's not healing. And that would be stage 2 of wound healing. And after we go through stage 2, we need to resurface and smooth the skin. So we need to move those mesenchymal cells back into an epithelial cell to restructure, reorganize, and resurface the skin. So what we're doing at Maricris Therapeutics is we're using human afterbirth tissue from healthy C-section births. Mothers are consented, screened, and they agree to donate various afterbirth tissues. So for anyone that may have had a child recently, they may have been questioned as to whether or not they want to donate their cord blood tissue for research or medical purposes. Very similar process. And we're using those afterbirth tissues to try to rebirth adult cells that are not correctly functioning into an active cell type that can promote healing in a wound bed. Specifically, we focus on human amniotic fluid that's harvested from a C-section birth where the mother is consented, rigorously screened, blood is collected for infectious disease testing. A healthy mother, a healthy baby leave the operating room, and there's a harvest procedure to collect the amniotic fluid, which contains all types of molecular components. We make 3 different products from these molecular components. I've classified them as molecule P and molecule X, and happy to take some questions or discussion afterwards. But when we have a purified fraction from amniotic fluid of molecule X, what we've been able to show in our research is that we can actually convert an epithelial cell which might be stuck in phase 1 of wound healing, and we can convert that cell, and we've shown this through the genes that are activated, into a mesenchymal-like cell or a medicinal cell, which progresses that wound into stage 2 of wound healing. When we use a combination of the class of molecules P and X in a formulation, we're using that as a fertilizer to promote growth and activity with the converted epithelial cells that are now mesenchymal-like. And they start to deposit collagen, and it's kind of like feeding yourself espresso on a day that you're drained, right? Do the work, fill in the wound. And as that wound goes through the remodeling stage, using a purified fraction of the fluid with a class of molecules of P, we can convert the cells back to an epithelial-like cell state and support the resurfacing or rekeratinization of the skin. And so by approaching wound healing based on the phase that the wound is in, we're able to have a precision wound healing algorithm. So currently our company has an investigational new drug cleared just for our PX formulation, which we're evaluating in venous leg ulcers. This is the final slide here in a case study that we did. The patient family found us from a press release that we had. It was a 44 square centimeter, 3-year non-healing wound. We prepared the wound leading up to treatment at week 0. Over 17 weeks, a wound that hadn't healed in 3 years, patient was facing amputation. We were successful at getting that wound close to complete closure by week 17. There was a follow-up visit at the clinic. The patient never returned, and we never had a follow-up picture, and we got great success from the conversations that we had with the patient family. That's what we're doing here at Maricruz Therapeutics. I appreciate the Frontier putting up with us for, I think we're going on at least 3, maybe 4 years now. Happy to take some questions from you guys.
That's some fascinating stuff about wound care. We've got question and answer time, so we'll go right up here to the front for our first question.
Well, that's just fascinating and so promising for a lot of different types of external wounds. I'm wondering if this is something that you're also exploring for internal inflammatory issues. We hear so much of intestinal issues that might benefit from something like this.
Sure. I think our current science, and I think our strategy has been follow the science. 5 years ago, if you had asked me what we're going to do as a company, I probably would not have said wound healing, but just following a lot of the early stage science, it just kind of told us, like, you got to do this. There's great data here, and so we actually did a complete left turn when we thought we were going right, and just decided that it was a decision tree that we hit to go into wound healing. But the company was actually founded in an effort to support organ regeneration. And as kind of the research progressed, this wound healing was what we saw as a first base hit, specifically not with a precision-based treatment model, because the regulatory path is going to get a bit complex with 3 different formulations, but we had a formulation, what I called PX, that we interacted with FDA and have entered into a phase 2 clinical trial. So that's kind of where we are today, but we're super interested in regenerative medicine for all types of therapeutic applications, and specifically the organ regeneration is something that we have in the research pipeline. But I think wound is the hyper-focus of, let's just try to get a commercial product into play, and then let's kind of build on that with more precision-based focus. So I hope that gives kind of some answer there.
All right, next question is coming to you from your left.
Thank you, sir. I had a text from a colleague. They asked, how can I order OptiSite if I suffer from dry eye?
Separate commercial product, and happy to point them to you, Jamar.
Always be closing. Always be closing. All right, next question coming from right here.
I have a kind of a question. Is there any thought of doing this for just regular wound healing? Like, so I had a knee replacement, right? And it took a long time for the wound to heal. And I didn't know, I mean, I think it finally healed fine, and, you know, nothing's, but if this could help the healing process. I was kind of wondering if, not necessarily a complete, like, oh, it hasn't healed in 3 years, but something that you know the person's going through a surgery. Is there a way to use this type of drug to help the recovery process?
I absolutely think that this is something that should be used in post-surgical suture applications. I think we looked at, you know, when you go into an investigational new drug, you've got to pick an indication. You know, we got a lot of different feedback from healthcare providers, and one of the areas that we felt like the largest unmet need in chronic wounds was venous leg ulcers. We identified one product that had questionable data. It's a topical application product for venous leg ulcers. You know, even though there's a lot of underlying pathological issues that we're not treating, we're trying to treat the wound that's kind of the symptom of venous reflux disease. We thought this was the market that really needed innovation, was really serving an unmet need. And so it was really the stepwise approach, right? Do we need to go into diabetic foot ulcers? There's a lot of things out there in advanced wound care and diabetic ulcer care. And so we decided, let's just take a risk. Let's try to be an innovator, and let's really try to help patients with venous leg ulcers. That was our step one. To get the product in a commercial state, we are going to need a drug label. And so venous leg ulcers was the primary target, but I could see this as something being used for all types of post-surgical applications, whether it be elective or not. But in order to get it into the market, we needed to you know, go through a series of clinical trials, and today we're in phase 2 studies. But I think it's a completely needed application to reduce scarring, enhance healing. But would that meet an unmet need? And I think some of the payers in the market may argue, like, all right, well, scarring is just going to be something that's natural, and it might be elective. That, you know, how do we get paid for a product that's just an elective product? So I think long answer short, yes, there's an opportunity there, but that was kind of the justification on why we selected the initial disease state that we were targeting.
All right, give it up for Chris Broderick.